when Jacob texted me this, my first response was if his term in DC was any indication, the NHL players are about to get screwed on their next contract.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Marty Walsh left the position of Secretary of the Department of Labor to be a director for the National Hockey League Players Association. And this, by all accounts, it stunned everybody. It stunned Biden. It stunned, like this really, really came out of nowhere. And it's just unimaginable that you would give up labor secretary to be, I guess it's unimaginable to me as somebody who cares about the labor movement, let's say, that I would give up being labor secretary to be the director of the National Hockey League Players Association.
Yeah, I'm pretty fascinated by this development because, like, on one hand, I understand that, like, as you were saying, Adam, that, like, a lot of the battlefields of labor historically have been in sports, in the sense that historically, like in the late 60s, there was this player in the MLB, Curt Flood, who he was attempting to reject a trade. He was trying to refuse to be traded to another team, and he basically filed kind of like an arbitration, like a labor suit against the MLB, saying that I'm a worker, I'm allowed to choose where I work. And he appealed that all the way to the Supreme Court, but he lost. And that was one of the biggest labor cases in the late 1960s about like whether these athletes are workers or not, and if they can be considered workers or not. And funnily enough, when it's still in the vein of baseball, one of the most successful MLBPA heads that really strengthened the Major League Baseball Players Association was a man named Marvin Miller, who was initially really heavily involved with the international mine workers during World War II, and then later on the iron workers, and then he ultimately became the head of the MLBPA and really strengthened labor rights for the MLB after their conferences sort of splintered to make the MLB the primary baseball league. I bring all of this up to say that, like, it's fascinating how sometimes these things really break into the national consciousness, and a guy like Marty Walsh is, for whatever reason, seeing this opportunity to think that he could be, I guess, in his mind, because of course I can't speak to what he's thinking, but it kind of does boggle the mind from my perspective to think that he could affect more change or bring more cachet to the NHLPA as opposed to being a literal cabinet secretary affecting labor policy for the entire country. And if he wanted to help those players or assist those players, he could certainly do that in a more sectoral way across the board than just representing hockey players at large. My biggest curiosity when it comes to this as well, as a result, is I'm wondering how big of a Bruins fan Marty Walsh is. And I'm wondering if those ticket packages are kind of nice for an NHL official to maybe Marty doesn't like living in DC. Maybe he doesn't like the bureaucracy, and maybe he'd like to just go see a few more home games back in Boston.
Have you read Robert Kuttner's piece about this in the American Prospect?
No, I haven't, but I love Bob's a great writer. I love reading his stuff. What was he saying?
So this is very interesting. He says that Walsh got the offer partly because of his close ties to Boston Bruins owner and NHL Board of Governors chair Jeremy Jacobs, who has donated thousands of dollars to Walsh's campaign committees over the years.
Oh, shocker.
So
just what you love as the union to hear that your new leader is in tight with ownership. When Jacob texted me this, my first response was, well, the NHL players are about to get screwed on their next contract. If his term in DC was any indication of how his leadership will go.
Well, his
but yeah, I
term
guess it's
as-
less controversial to be in the NHL than busting national rail strikes.
His term as labor secretary, but also, you know, the idea that I'm going to have a union representative who's big buddies, who has literally gotten money from my boss, you know, like that's
suspect.
Yeah. Sus.
Yeah, you wouldn't feel great about it if you're a hockey player, if you had any sort of understanding of how the Department of Labor and the Biden administration completely, and they're probably their most recent large labor action, essentially forced rail workers to accept 1 day of sick leave and then call it a day, to be like, hey, we can't really have this happen right now. You know, it's near the holidays. Like, listen, I'm with you guys. I love workers. I love trains. I'm Amtrak Joe, remember? But like, get back to work and we'll figure this out a little bit later. All right. Like, and to see that be essentially what the tenor of the largest labor situation that came before, it specifically came before the federal government, how that was handled, then the fact that Marty Walsh was the head of that department where that happened, and then seeing this disclosure that maybe a little bit of a deal sweetener is that his two friends are heavy investors in his local team and heavy investors in Marty Walsh. You don't. It's not great to have a guy whose biggest track record before leaving his most recent position was essentially breaking a rail strike, and then seeing that he's buddy with ownership for when you need to ratify your next contract.
Yeah, not good.
Not at all. So,
and I think it's important. That this ties in exactly to what we were talking about initially. Is that this is important because it's not like this won't just affect hockey players if these things come to fruition this way. Labor is like any other industry or like any other policy area. These things leak into each other. If there's a bad situation where Walsh sides with management over players and they can't ratify a contract, if there's a lockout, if there's a protracted strike, it still hurts the players to not be able to play and make money. And if that is actually the case, Rob Manfred in the MLB, who's the current MLB commissioner, but was known as essentially Bud Selig, the former MLB commissioner's fixer, essentially. He kind of was just the guy to put out fires and stamp out dissent in the league. What if Rob Manfred says, oh, look, Marty Walsh, Biden's labor secretary, he's doing that. Maybe I'll take some notes for our next labor negotiation. Exactly. Adam Silver, a guy who, you know, NBA writers and fans alike love to be like, this league is different. Like, he's so cool and loves players. It's like he loves them until they criticize China, and he loves them until they mess with his money. So maybe he can be like, listen, I'm taking notes from this. So like, and then Roger Goodell, the ultimate vampire, the ultimate toady to all the owners. Like all of this, I bring all of these guys up to say these unique patterns of like evilness or like ways to screw over workers. They won't just stay in hockey if that's the case. They will seep into other aspects of sports, and they can seep into other aspects of labor. There's always going to be some level of a laboratory to see how you can uniquely crush workers. And Adam, I think pointed to it in the sense of the NCAA essentially saying, what if we just neoliberalized paying student athletes? They work for us, but somebody else pays them. They go to school at a public institution, but the car wash says, oh, you're funny, we'll give you $3,000 for an ad, but it keeps us clean so we don't have to actually pay you or be your employer.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.